Hey everyone, my name is Srinivasa Sheikh. I'm a senior solutions architect at AWS. Okay, I got it. So, in my experience at AWS, I got an opportunity to work with multiple large customers where I talk about AWS security, some of the cloud security best practices. In this session, I'm going to talk about some of the fundamental security topics that can help you to elevate your security in the AWS cloud. So I think just going through the agenda quickly, I will go through the security foundations, some of the foundational topics that needs to secure your workloads in AWS, then going through multiple topics within the different areas like identity and access management. And during the course of the time, I will be talking about different AWS services that can help you to meet these requirements. Like many of you might be aware, like this is a slide that I have taken the number of malware attacks happening across different industries. Like you can see the public administration is at the top of the list. Uh, like this shows the importance of making the public administration systems to be more highly secured. Let me get into the agenda. So we'll start with the security foundations first. So like Abhilash told, right? So whenever you consider AWS, the first thing is how do you set up the foundation? Like how do you set up your landing zone? So one way you can think about is like using AWS organizations to come up with the different multiple accounts. And each of the account you need to use for an isolated different aspects of your environment. So you can start with an organizations account. Okay, it's a management account where you run your organizations and AWS control tower that will actually help you to implement the safeguard rails. And then like additional security tooling like AWS single sign-on. And as a matter of practice, you should always consider using a log archive account. So this is the account where like it doesn't need to have a read-only like write access. It's a read-only access where you'll have your logs stored for long-term storage. Maybe like in case of federal agencies, like you need to follow multiple compliance rules. You need to provide the logs for analysis. When you start the landing zone or the multi-account setup, make sure that like you enable the cloud trail logging and the AWS config. These will track the configuration of AWS resources as well as any changes who make the changes on the AWS services. Recently, I was reading an article on the US Office of Management and Budget. They published a memorandum asking all the federal government agencies to do the event logging. And for that, like log archive account will be very helpful. And then you have operations account. This could be your central operations account where you will have the security services like AWS Security Hub, Amazon Guard Duty that will keep track of all the accounts within your organizations and making sure that you don't have any security vulnerabilities. And then like when it comes to the workloads, like a bare minimum, we request you to have separate accounts for your development account and then another account for your production account. Again, like all this can be created with the AWS control tower or the landing zone accelerator. Like recently, it's a Department of Defense, USA Department of Defense, that use landing zone accelerator to deploy an AWS cloud, including baseline security and all the compliance practices. So like once you have an account, how do you secure an account, right? So we have something called like a service control policies. So this is a sample policy that denies any of the IAM user creations, access keys. So like we'll dive more into the upcoming slides on the identity and access management. So like you also want to think about threat model, right? So identifying and prioritizing the risk using a threat model so that you know like where you want to put your efforts. And like always stay up to date. with the latest recommendations. For that, you may be interested to subscribe to some of the CEV forums. And when it comes to the AWS, I have listed some of the links in the slide that you can subscribe and get the latest information about the AWS securities. And to make it more interactive throughout this exercise, I'm going to use very sample architecture. So I will start with this is like a two-tier web application where like you have EC2s running, which are internet facing, and there is a database. Amazon Aurora is an RDS database, and then a serverless function Lambda to store some data in S3, and there is a notification by SNS. And as we go through the further slides, we'll expand this base architecture. So let's jump into the identity and access management first. So again, let's start with the architecture, what we have initially. So at the bottom, you see the management account. So what we recommend is always use some single sign-on, okay? Use central identities to improve your security posture. Do not use local accounts in multiple AWS accounts and then establishing a cross account. It is a nightmare. So always go with a centralized identity using single sign-on. And then enable some multi-factor authentication, have some complex password policies. And implement audit credentials so that you know who is accessing. And the access will be people like you and me who will be using AWS account for day-to-day activities. And let's expand this one further, right? So when it comes to your workloads, you want to use the temporary credentials. So if you are using SSO, by default, when you try to log in, you are going to get a temporary credentials. And for your instances like EC2 and Lambdas, they will be assigned with an IAM role. So using an AWS system, like simple token service, you will be going to get a temporary credentials. And then when it comes to the database, you need to store the credentials somewhere. And you can use AWS Secrets Manager as a vault. And it has a native integrations with the databases so that if you have a policy where you need to rotate credentials, says every 60 days or 90 days, you can use those automatic features to enable the rotation. And for workforce people like you and I, to get the access to the command line interface through the integration with SSO. And when it comes to the permission management, you may have a need where you want to share the resources between the accounts. And for that, you can use resource access manager. And also we recommend to evaluate what access you have, public and cross account access. And for that, you can use AWS identity and access management analyzer. And always, right, don't be lazy. Give only the bare minimum permissions what you need. So not recommending to use any wildcard permissions. And let's get into the next topic of detection, how do you detect? So with the same architecture, and now we want to configure the logs. So all the logging from your AWS services and applications to push to a centralized logging, where you can use that information, tie with the CloudWatch metrics, and use some findings from a Security Hub and Amazon Guard Duty to get the full visibility of what is happening within different accounts. And remember that Security Hub and Guard Duty, these are the tools that you will be setting up in your organization operations account, and that will help you to monitor all your accounts. And for the application logging, for the EC2s, if you're running on EC2s, the web servers, you can use a CloudWatch agent that will send all the logs to the CloudWatch. And it is very easy with the databases and Lambdas. You just have to go and enable the logging. And also you can send additional logging like VPC flow logs. And one decision you always need to make whether you want to store the logs long-term versus within the AWS, within the same account, in case of transactional nature. And like you want to know like how do we verify your architecture against the AWS well-architected practices, right? So AWS Security Hub provides certain checks that you can use to ensure that like the workloads within your account are aligned with the AWS well-architected best practices. And Security Hub does provide that. And this is more like this is something I'll always like it, right? Making security events as actionable. So you have tooling like Amazon Guard Duty, Security Hub. You just don't want to like send information to some email box with large aliases where people don't look at. Like make them more actionable. If you are using Guard Duty, probably like, when there is a threat happen, you open up a Slack discussion or Teams, and then like capture all the information that you need to quickly troubleshoot. In the screen, like in the slide, I have a run book so that like the incident team can quickly find out where to look at and the information will be handy. And like AWS config provides conformance packs. So if you are like a government agencies, federal, right, you need to follow NIST compliance model, like maybe FedRAMP. Conformance packs, like there are some sample templates for all these compliances are provided in AWS config. You can start with those and you can always expand to your organization needs. And these conformance packs will help you to identify, evaluate the conformance of AWS resources running within your account. And sometimes you can automate to take any remediation actions. And the information, like the information you can find out in the links in the slide. And let's get into the infrastructure protection now. So like we want to make it like multiple layers, right? So create different network layers. So implement a multiple layered strategy so that it will make someone who wants to crack your environment difficult. So you will start with the internet. So like a request will come for DNS to Route 53, which is the AWS DNS service. And every request that comes to the Route 53 will be logged into a CloudWatch so that you know from where the requests are coming. And you may be using a CloudFront, which is an edge service, and apply firewall rules. So, so for that, you can use AWS Web Application Firewall to allow the traffic only from certain regions, maybe from some IPs. And then like when it comes to your VPCs, like follow the multiple subnet strategy. So you will have a public subnet where like you will have a load balancer, which is internet facing, and maybe like a shared subnet that has internet connection out. And all your databases, application layers, Lambdas, everything will be running within a private network. So the only way to get into these private subnets is through the load balancer. And then like AWS provides security groups, network access control list for more fine-grained permissions. And always like think about following some like a infrastructure inspection and protection, like AWS network firewall that will monitor the active, like the traffic that is coming to your VPC, and packet inspection.
Srini, you know, we've got a few minutes left. This is great stuff. Again, just want to make sure you're aware of that. It's going to be a great lead into the checkpoint segment.
Okay. So you want me to like summarize, Rob?
We've got about 1 or 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
I will some of the key highlights.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I think like we have seen like there are like different services that can help you to do the infrastructure protection, vulnerability management. I would like to go quickly to the slides. Okay, I think like data protection is a key aspect. So like there are different services within AWS, like AWS KMS, and you can use AWS Amazon Messi to protect your data. And like always follow the encryption in transit and encryption in rest. So for that, you can use a certificate manager or KMS. And when it comes to the incident response, like follow some type of a run book so that you can have an incident management plan captured as a playbooks, run books. In case of an incident happens, so you know exactly what things to be done, right? And for that, you can use game days within your organizations to simulate the incidents. And always like make sure the environment that you need to troubleshoot is pre-configured and available. And like these are some of the links like where you can follow what are the AWS well-architected principles for security. And one link that I will, like if you're starting from like beginning, I will request you to look into the landing zone accelerator. With that, I think like the slide will be available for you to go through. And if you have anything, I think please reach out to Ron or me. Thanks, Ron. Over to you.